entertain a motion to approve our consent agenda consisting of the October 20, 2016 regular meeting minutes, the October 20, 2016 closed session minutes, the October 4th, 2016 District 210 Advisory Committee meeting minutes, and the November 4th, 2016 payroll.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Kozel,
Aye.
Mr. Kirkning,
Aye.
Mr. Costick,
Aye.
Mr. Lucetti,
Aye.
Mr. Lulo,
Aye.
Mrs. Glatz.
Aye. Awards, presentations, and/or recognition. Report of data from the Illinois School Report Card.
Last month we could report generally that we did really well, and we can finally show you some of the results. Got some very nice newspaper coverage out of this, and again, you've seen some of the slides without all the numbers. So this was a big one. Our PSAT testing. Next month we'll have our national merit kids from last year in, and we have a really nice number this year. But when you look at that bottom number, sophomores and juniors, that's beautiful for us with the transition to SAT. It's a practice SAT. Our best and brightest will end up with some nice recognition and scholarships, but the rest of the kids, it's just a chance to put their toe in the SAT water, and that's great. So those are huge numbers across the board. Every school did well. We've instituted now that PSAT 8-9 for our new placement test. All of our public feeder junior highs have given it already. The private school kids come in on Saturdays and fill them in. So about 90% of our kids right now incoming have taken it. We'll start to get those results in a few months or in a few weeks, and then we'll be able to set some scores for recommendations. So that's going well. This was on the report card, that freshman on track. That really high percentage of kids that, of 1,747 freshmen last year, 69 are at risk, and we know who they are, and they're on our RTI lists. We check on them monthly, if not bi-monthly, and so many of those kids would not be labeled at risk already after the first quarter, so we're moving that along well. The AP, as we've said, that's our new normal. It's an expectation. We've gone that way, a little bit less dual credit. Those numbers are huge, doubled and tripled sometimes in what we've had in the past. And we did find out last year when we talked to U.S. News and World Report and Newsweek that they're looking more at AP scores and students that take AP tests than ever. So that bodes really well for us in the coming years. Graduation rates, we couldn't give you the solid numbers. But again, when you look back to that column on the right, the class of 2013, district-wide, we were in that 92-93%, and then it went up a little. And then we put in the adoptions program that Dr. Tingley brought in, and Amy Fury really oversees and coordinates. And so those numbers for large high schools are spectacular. And so 97% district graduation rate, and that's a 4-year graduation rate. It's probably 98 to 99 if you look at the kids that take a little bit longer. So it's fantastic for us. What really caught the headlines this year were the state either stayed the same or dipped a little bit on PARCC scores. We went up in English and language arts. Remember that the PARCC is an unusual test. Our kids haven't taken anything like that before. The kids coming into high school now have a 3-year pattern of PARCC. So that kind of testing isn't unusual to them. So that first year in English language arts where we had the 35%, the 38%, was okay. That was a little above the state average. It wasn't great, but when we looked at this year, all of our schools were up in that close to 50% on an extremely difficult English language arts test. So that was great, high numbers. I'm sure that's going to be among the highest in the south suburbs. And then the math, we were very disappointed with that first year. It's one of the reasons we were really confirmed in moving to that new math program. And with just 1 year of the new math program in, they either doubled or in some cases tripled. And so we won't be taking PARCC this year, but the good thing is the SAT math is very much like the PARCC test. So at least the kind of things we're doing in algebra now and geometry are preparing kids for that. So the last thing to mention, and then I'll have Amy report for a little bit. These are the monthly goals, if you remember, in September. And in October, it was really about instruction. And we want to shift now to really the other pieces, the instructional technology, the staff development. This goal at the very bottom, train staff in the social emotional standards, that's new. And Amy's going to walk you through a little bit of how we do that here. That's been very positive for our students and our teachers.
Well, good evening. One of the reasons why this is a very important goal for us is kind of stems from a big picture view of what's happening in the world around us. When Every Student Succeeds Act replaces No Child Left Behind, there's going to be some changes starting with the 2017-18 school year. One of these changes that we'll be seeing is in the accountability. So not only will there be the traditional accountability like standardized testing and graduation rates, but also they're planning to put something in related to non-academic factors like social emotional learning. And so that's why we decided this year to get out ahead of it a little bit. Begin training our staff in what the social emotional standards are. They are derived from the Common Core, to recognize and address what the student needs are in this area. So we're using our Lunch and Learn platform that we have to have the professional development for our teachers. We decided to focus on the social emotional needs of our students and focus on how that translates and affects classroom performance for our students. So one of the first areas, the 5 major areas of the social emotional learning standards, it's broken down into 5 domains, 5 major areas. So if you look at the red, that's kind of the areas of self-management and self-awareness. Then there's the 2 blue areas, which are kind of the external areas, the social awareness and relationship skills. And then green is that decision-making, kind of the go-between between those 2 areas. So for our very first Lunch and Learn, we decided to focus in the land of the red and talk about teen stress and anxiety, kind of a hot topic in our society today. And so we know that a lot of times students will not reach out for help. There are a lot of signs and symptoms that sometimes students are having too much stress and leading to anxiety. And so what we trained our teachers in and what we really focused on is when they're in the classrooms and on the fields and in the rehearsal areas, what to look for to recognize a student in having too much stress or having anxiety. And then when they recognize those things, what to do, where do we go, how do we get the help for these students that they need. And that's really the heart of what the social emotional standards really are about. And so the next area that we focused on raised the social awareness in an area that we hadn't really kind of talked about a whole lot, and that is with the McKinney-Vento Act, which sort of addresses any sort of students who are having non-traditional home lives. A lot of times they're referred to as homeless. And so I just wanted to share with you 2 quick stories of students that, because of this raised awareness that we found, and we were able to kind of help. So first we had a student named Ashley, and just at the beginning of the school year, she decided to leave her Lincoln Way home due to an abusive situation, and she decided to move in with some family down in Peoria. Ashley wanted a Lincoln Way diploma, so what Ashley is doing every day, and according to the law she's allowed to, she is actually driving from Peoria to Lincoln Way every day. She is working, she is on shortened release. She actually then goes to work locally and drives back home. Well, when we found this out, yes, that's according to the law she can do this, we decided to use Title I funds, which are specifically federal funds specifically for situations like this, and get her some gas cards, because she is bound and determined to get that Lincoln Way diploma. And she will graduate in December, and she will be enrolling in that junior college down in Peoria. She's going to be fine. Then we have Bradley. Bradley was a different situation. We were trying to figure out why Bradley wasn't coming to school. Well, it turns out Bradley's been sleeping on different couches since he was about 7 years old. When we caught up with him to try and find out what we could do to get him to come to school, we realized he had 2 sets of clothes. He had the set that he was wearing and then the one that was in his backpack, because he didn't know where he was going to be staying. So we immediately set him up again, used Title I funds specifically for purposes like this. We got him some clothes, we got him some shoes, and we set him up in EdOps, in our alternative education program in EdOps, where he is attending, where he will graduate on time at the end of the school year, and then he is off to the pipe fitters. So these are just some of the things that we are doing, that when we raise awareness that these are some of the situations our students are in, and our teachers are part of our eyes and ears to try and help these students, this is what the kind of things that we can make happen. And so when we talk about social emotional learning, all the research says that it's not a separate program. It's not something you buy. It's not empathy on Thursday. It's actually integrating social and emotional learning right into what we already do. Our curriculum, our activities, our athletics, building of the relationships with our students. That's what works the most. So when we think about what we do here at Lincoln Way, how is it embedded? Yes, we do have explicit instruction in social emotional needs. We do have social workers and school psychologists for our most needy students with groups and with one-on-one programs. We also have our asset program run by our activities and asset directors who do bring our character education into our classrooms every month. We also can think about how we do academic integration. That is that whole idea of embedding these ideas and lessons right into our curriculum. I mean, who can forget the lessons and morals and values that to be learned from Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, or historical figures who stood for what's right. That's where this embedded social emotional learning can really take place. And how about all sorts of other social emotional experiences we have here at Lincoln Way, whether it be drama, music, art, athletics, or just being part of something bigger than yourself, all parts of social emotional experiences. Not to mention service opportunities to others, our Feed My Serving Children, supplying food banks, even all of the organizations like Key Club and ROTC that devote their time to service to others. And of course, let's not forget the most important piece of all, just those building of the relationships, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom as well. So that's where we are headed. We are focusing, like I said, on these 5 areas, raising awareness for our teachers, making sure we're looking out for our students. Coming soon, we're going to talk about grit and resilience, and then the popular topic in education today, having a growth mindset and how that affects student motivation and student achievement.
Yeah, Amy will never tell you herself, but after the lunch and learn, after she presented this to teachers, she had probably a dozen teachers that showed up and reaching in their pocket, what can I do? Give me the name of a kid, who can I help? That's who they are. And then she also wouldn't tell you that she's the one that does the shopping. So if it's a student that needs clothes, she goes out and does that and then pays for it and then gets reimbursed later. And just big heart. They make fun of her and me for getting all teary-eyed on this stuff, but that's what it takes. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Good stuff. And for reference, that was part of our curriculum and instruction update, item D2. So moving on to D3, or student council presidents. Okay, from Central, do I have Mr. Joseph Nasso and Ms. Kelly Newton? Kelly?
Hello, sorry, Joey couldn't make it, apparently. Currently, our student council is partnered with Friends United, who is collecting food items for Operation Care Package, which is to give items sent overseas to their troops. And we are encouraging our members to bring in items to the end of this month to be donated, which is a really great cause, and we're glad to be partnered with them. Also, we are sponsoring a holiday family for the holiday season, and we have asked our members to donate a small amount of money, whatever they can. We asked for $5. If they can't bring $5, we'll take whatever they can give, because it's a great opportunity to help a family in our district locally to make their holiday season a little brighter and find some presents for them. So our exec board, once we get the money, will go out and go shopping for this family, and we're super excited to be helping out with that. And then after the holiday season is wrapping up, we will begin to plan tour, which we're also very excited about. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Ms. Kylie Mead and Mr. Raj Patel from East.
This past Tuesday, LWWatch Student Council attended the SWSC Student Council Convention. The SWSC member schools came together at the Homewood Suites in Norman Park and heard remarks from the keynote speaker about responding to setbacks and overcoming adversity. In addition, we met with students from all other schools and shared ideas. Within our home schools, we faced group challenges and worked together to accomplish these.
Thank you.
This week, Student Council is hosting its annual Silver Turkey Food Drive. Non-perishable food items, gift cards, and cash donations are being accepted to all first-hour classes. Tomorrow after school, Lincoln Way East Student Council Executive Board will be delivering the donations to the food pantry and helping them stock the shelves. Along with that, FPLA had 102 people participate in its blood drive about a week ago, and 56 pints of blood were donated to the American Red Cross. Along with that, Read for a Lifetime is currently going on, and we have over 630 students registered for this event, which is a record at Lincoln Bays. And a couple weeks ago, during our Pennies for Patients drive, he's raised $7,432.52, with Mrs. Graham raising over $1,500 in her class alone. And all of this money is going for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society.
Congratulations. Mitchell Elkoser and Samantha Mitchell.
Hello. Alright. Hello, at LWWatch West Student Council this past month, we organized a Halloween movie night for students where they can come with friends and sit and cuddle up in blankets and sit in our cafeteria and watch a nice Halloween movie night. They were able to purchase a $2 ticket, which included a bottle of water, popcorn, and candy. And we also just today put together 10 Thanksgiving baskets for the New Life Church right next to Lincoln West. And the food was donated by our fellow members in our Lincoln West students.
And then also, we a couple months ago sold breast cancer awareness T-shirts for at West, and the numbers came back, and we raised about $3,000 that we donated to the National Breast Cancer Foundation. Along with that, we also attended the SWSC Student Council Convention, and it was a fun day, and all of it was a very enjoyable experience. Lots of good ideas were shared among the schools. And then also, we are going into planning. We've decided on a space theme, so expect some upcoming out of this world, days, everything like that. That's not the theme, it's better than that. But that's coming up. We're going into wheelchair basketball season. We're planning that. That'll be in April, where we will host a game for the LWSRA Special Rec students, where we will have athletes from different sports, teachers, and students from West playing in wheelchair basketball game against the athletes themselves, where we will raise money to donate to the LWSRA.
Wonderful. Well, collectively, you're all doing great things. Keep up the good work. Thank you. All right. Item D4, financial projections.
That's right. Good evening. I welcome the chance to be able to work with you on some financial projections. For those of you who don't know me, I am a community member for 25 years. I was a board member myself for 18 of those years. I've been helping school districts do strategic financial planning for about 15 years now. The process I use, dubbed the STRAT plan, builds on audited financial data and budgets filed with the state and develops factors and drivers that model your various revenue and expense streams, and then provides the ability to forecast financial health over the next decade or so. So a typical question I usually get, decade, 10 years? Do you believe any of those numbers that far out? And the answer is twofold. No, I do not believe a specific number 8 or 10 years out. What we're looking for is trends and nodes and decision points, and those are very important. Secondly, some of the decisions you make in the short term have serious compounding effects that far out, so you do need to look that far out. So specific numbers, no. Trends, decision points, nodes, absolutely. To do that, of course, you must make some assumptions about the future economic and political landscape. Those are listed in general terms in tab 2 of the book, and specifically for Lincoln Way in tab 3. I won't go over them here, except to say that when we develop them with the administration, they are generally based on a consistently conservative view of that future, and therefore I think they provide a realistic view of that future. So what are the primary issues facing Lincoln Way? The key strategic issues that we need to address. The big issue for Lincoln Way, of course, is the overhanging debt, the tax anticipation warrants for short-term operation. Until those can be eliminated, there is not much flexibility. And as a result, the critical issues for Lincoln Way are settling into an efficient operation of three schools, which you're in the middle of, reducing expenses enough to convert those previous deficits into surpluses, and then in turn being able to apply those surpluses to reduce and eventually eliminate those tax anticipation warrants, TAWs. And eventually then, continuing to provide those surplus funds to rebuild an adequate operating base and provide some contingency for some strategic options in the future. With that straight plan process, then, we can project literally any combination or permutation of cases into the future. What we looked at in this book is a current base case, our best estimate of what the future really looks like, given the current assumptions about the future. We then looked at some alternative cases, different variations, including specifically the effect of salary and benefits, some possibilities for Lincoln Way North, and then debt and taxes is an important issue down the road. We'll look at several different topics and charts: taxes, debt, cash flow, fund balances a couple ways, and then the state report card. There are more than those in the book, but these are some of the ones that we will then look for. First, in the current base case, let's take a look at the taxes. And you'll see, I should point out that all of these charts, all of the various funds are color-coded, so you'll consistently be able to pick out the ed fund in turquoise, and some of the smaller funds will basically ignore for a while, but the black total is what you want to focus on. And your tax rate is composed of the tax cap operating rate, shown in gray, on your page 15 if you want to look there, plus the debt service that is tacked on top of that to give you the total. You look pretty flat at about $1.75 for the operating rate, plus another 40 cents or so for debt, but that does escalate a little out in the future. And we'll look at that a little bit later. If you look at page 16, which I won't put up here, you'll see the cash flows show that the red expenses and green revenues are pretty much in balance for a while. As you begin to build some surpluses, you're using those to pay off the so-called TAWs. I won't go over those in detail because the more important chart is the fund balances. Now, this is a little bit of a busy chart, so I'd like to take a few minutes to make sure you understand that. Once again, the solid black total is the key metric here. And perhaps if you can find the turquoise ed fund, that's your biggest fund, which winds up deriving the black total. At the end of last year, EOY, end of year last year, you had about $8 million in the bank, but most of that was reserved for debt. So you had to borrow $20 million in tax anticipation warrants just to start the school year. That will be paid back during the school year as those tax receipts actually arrive. That situation is shown here. You borrowed $20 million, and you're able to use that $20 million on top of your ongoing real funds to operate the school. As true fund balances recover, both in total and the ed fund, your need for tax anticipation warrants declines over time, from 20 million to progressively less, and 20 million being tacked on to progressively less to let you operate. After those anticipation warrants are eliminated, your fund balances, all of them, but added in particular in black total, resume a very healthy increase. Okay, let's look at those fund balances in another way. A better way to look at that sometimes is what we call the days.
I don't know if you want to take questions. You want to do questions now or after you finish?
That's,
Tell us.
that's up to you. I probably prefer to run through it because we can get kind of sidetracked, but that's up to you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Days cash on hand is probably a better way to look at fund balances. That is the amount of cash you have in hand to fund your expenses before you need your new cash infusion. And since tax receipts from the county usually arrive in two main shots, just as you are paying your tax bills in two main shots, most districts target conventionally for about a 3 to 6 month days cash on hand basis. So this chart repeats the fund balances, except on that basis. So you can see 90 to 120 days, 3 to 6 months is the total that is usually considered an efficient operating rate. And because of the tax anticipation warrants, which are added to ed funds and added to the total, you're able to operate in that general range. But just like in the previous chart, when the need for those is no longer around, then your fund balances begin to recover nicely. Okay, so what does the state think of this? The state report card grades districts in 4 categories and based on 5 parameters. The 4 categories being recognition, review, warning, and watch. You've obviously fallen into the watch category. There are no silver bullets. It's going to take time for you to dig your way out of those tax anticipation warrants, but it does, consistent with the previous charts, appear that your employees begin moving into the upper categories. Why do we think this is possible? We think this is possible for several reasons. First of all, your current budget shows a nominal underrun of about $2 million, and that appears to be reasonable for the first third of the year. You appear to be meeting or probably beating a little bit that through the first third of the year. $1 million in the bank in terms of the surplus. We have built in here some retirement savings. You do have, over the next few years, a couple dozen of your highest paid teachers who are retiring at the end of a long career, but they are basically maxed out, and they will be replaced if and when they are needed by somebody with a more modest average type of salary. That looks like maybe another $1 million plus to add to the surplus. We have looked at a growing tax base, albeit modestly, but when you look at the statistics, and we've talked to the county assessor, things are improving in the last few years, and you will, looks like this year, add more than you have had in a number of years, another $1 million plus perhaps, and some others, but those are the major factors. Recall also, as I say this, all of these assumptions have been made with basically a conservative bent so that we don't think we're being too optimistic. There are 2 important caveats, however. The first one is, this is a first-time budget first time for 3 schools, and there is bound to be some learning curve in the first-time budget like that. And the future starts from this foundation, so it's important that those projected surpluses do in fact materialize. Secondly, the most important discipline over the next few years will be expense control. And the critical piece of that is salary and benefits. And here's why. About 80% of your operating revenue comes from tax cap dollars capped by the so-called PTEL tax cap. 80% of your revenue. PTEL only allows that revenue to increase by the CPI every year. Flip side of that coin, about 80% more or less of your expense side winds up being salary and benefits. So it's critical to keep things in balance that the revenue and expense sides balance out. So in terms of salary and benefits, as a first approximation, you need to make sure that salary and benefit escalations don't exceed the CPI, which is where your revenue is going to come from. And the base case that we've used does in fact assume that you will be able to restrain salary and benefits to CPI increases. Okay, let's look at the critical importance of salary and benefits, and that's not just Lincoln Way. This is universal for all school districts. As we just noted, we need to keep salary and benefits in line with the CPI. So what we've done by way of example, this is now tab 5 in the books, titled Salary and Benefit Restraints. An often misunderstood part of this is the somewhat subtle effect that there's a tremendous compounding effect this can have over time in either direction, whether you exceed the CPI or you're able to restrain below it. As an illustration, what we've done in this case is arbitrarily assume, let's say in the next 3-year contract, you could restrain salary and benefits and hold them flat. This is your ed fund expenses, and in blue, this is our base case expenses with CPI, with salary escalations assumed at CPI. As a for instance case, we said, what if we had a 3-year freeze? Well, here's what happens to your ed fund expenses, and then they resume increasing at CPI in the model. And that has a tremendous compounding effect on the next page, 22, which I won't show here, but you can see the difference in expenses. Now, this is, of course, an arbitrary assumption intended simply to illustrate the long-term effects of this kind of strategy, whether it's possible either in size or length, obviously is debatable, but it does provide an illustration of the potential benefits of salaries above or below CPI. One final interesting note here. Notice the flat current base case here. That in large part is due to the retirements that we mentioned as you're replacing higher paid folks with more average paid folks. That tends to flatten your expenses a little bit for the next year. Part of the reason we think the surplus will materialize. And obviously this is a result of the freeze. Okay. There, of course, have been questions about Lincoln Way North and the possibility of reopening it. As a first approximation, we're going to guess it would take probably on the order of $7 million a year or so to operate and reopen North, more or less the amount that you have saved by closing it. A couple of charts, however, illustrate the problem. This repeats the fund balance chart that we saw earlier without the complication of the warrants thrown in there. But you can see in the short term, you simply do not have the money. You had to borrow $20 million to begin to operate the 3 schools you have. Another $7 million simply is not in the cards. Let's look at the next one on page 25. Here's another way to look at it. Again, taking the same chart, but I've converted it to a day's cash on hand. Your ed fund and your total funds without the tax anticipation warrants are way below the recommended 3 to 6 months. 90 to 120 days on page 25 is shown in kind of a shaded red or pink. That's where you generally, by conventional wisdom, need to be able to operate efficiently. And the actual fund balances don't get there for a number of years. You're able to operate because of the tax anticipation warrants, which keep you in that ballpark. But until you get into that range, there's just no way you could get the extra $7 million to reopen North. After that, things take off nicely. After that, you have a bunch of potential strategic options to consider, and I suppose things could be considered at that time, but that's way down the road, and that is absent the question of whether enrollment would support it, independent of that issue. But in the short term, it's just not financially feasible. Okay, the final issue we'll look at is debt and the taxes that go with it. If you remember from the tax chart, which only went out 10 years, currently your tax rate to support your debt, your bond and interest, is 42 cents, something like that, because you're paying about $15 million a year in bond and interest payments. The problem is that debt is all severely back-end loaded, and in a few years, 3-4 years, that begins to escalate 25, 30, upwards, pushing $40 million a year by the time that debt is ultimately retired. That means the tax rate goes from low 40s up to 60 and eventually up into the 80 to 90 cent range. While that's not an immediate problem, it is something you want to be looking forward to and investigating ways to mitigate that kind of steep increase. Some of the outstanding bonds are callable. That is, they can be refinanced just as you might do a home mortgage in about 2019. William Blair and Company, who does this kind of thing, we work with them, and they have provided several alternatives that might be considered at that time. And one is offered here just by way of example. And that's on page 28. In this example, and others are possible, but this is just by way of example, if you can read, starting where you are now, the current debt has about a 16-year time to run. This repeats the $15 million going up to 40 from the previous chart before it's retired. And the solid repeats that tax rate. Well, the one case that was run as an example is once the rates escalate a little, they are held at $26 million a year, and then extended a few years before they are retired. You're replacing this wedge of payments with this block here. And what that does is the tax rates top out about 60, and they're in the 50 to 60 cent range, and even drop more before the bonds are ultimately retired. It is generally advantageous, they tell me, for several reasons, to wait until the actual call date in 2019 before refinancing. But this sample calculation does illustrate the kind of arrangements that may be possible at that time. If we can cut this away, there is a possibility down the road. Finally, in summary, there are several key steps to reestablish a solid financial footing for Lincoln Way. And they include institutionalizing an ongoing budget surplus, which we believe is there and should grow, using that to eliminate the TAW debt, tax anticipation warrants, and then further using that surplus, emerging surplus, to reestablish workable fund balances and ultimately to establish prudent contingencies to enable future strategic actions. The district does appear to be on a reasonable track to do all of that. There are no silver bullets, and it will take a continued discipline. It will take several years of that discipline to institutionalize the expected surplus and eliminate the warrants. The several years after that, however, do look very promising and could provide a very positive financial status in the out years for you. Let me stop there and see what questions you may have.
My first question is, would it be possible for us to get the actual data behind these so that we can kind of see how all of these calculations were arrived at? I mean, one of my problems with how it was, the presentation and everything in chart form, I think we have a scale issue where, you know, in our books, when I look at that tax rate and you look at the jump from fiscal year 20 to 21, and it looks, okay, yeah, there's a little increase, but I mean, I know it's a 36% increase and it doesn't jump out at you. And, you know, there's just some things that I'm trying to reconcile when I see, you know, where things are on the chart. Like, for example, it says you took into account salaries that are already contractually obligated. I would think that they're going to go up, you know, the contract is 2%, plus there's all the lane changes and there's other, you know, people who have chosen options for retirement where they're getting more than 3 or even 6%. So I would expect that, you know, this year it was supposed to go up 1.5%, and it was salaries increased 3% from the teachers because of all those things. And I don't see that flowing through. So and then in the assumptions, you know, it says, well, we assume inflation will go back to 2.5%. When you say we're being very conservative in our estimates, and you know, our revenue is based on a tax cap, I mean, I can make my own judgment on if it's being conservative or not. If it's 2%, you know, or 2.5%, that's a lot different because inflation's been running a lot lower than that recently. So, I mean, it would help if we could see the data.
I would be happy to sit down with you and go over it with you. The strat plan model, last I counted, has about 80 interlocking Excel spreadsheets. Some of them are, a couple of them, the whole detailed thing is a couple hundred lines long. I typically, because it's proprietary, don't just give those out, but would be happy to go over any of it with you. I'm not sure it would make much sense without some explanation.
It would, yeah, I mean, it would just help me understand what, I mean, you have to kind of understand the inputs to understand the output.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll leave it with this one. All of these charts are showing I'll call it a hockey stick, where things really take off and improve, where you're going from like 30 days cash on hand to 90 in 1 year. And I just can't reconcile that. But one thing I think it is, and when you have total funds on here, you're not talking total operating funds. You're including the debt funds.
Correct.
So
And there is, depending on the year, $8, $10, $12 million in debt funds, which is shown on one of those charts, if you can flip to the next one, is shown, this is other funds, but that's primarily debt. That's why last year you had $8 million in total funds, but an awful lot of that was for debt. Let me make a couple comments.
just one second, because I want. So, if you go back to any of the days cash on hand charts,
Mhm.
and you have this huge improvement you're showing, I think it's being completely skewed by the debt increasing and that debt being paid in. I just don't see how we can go from 30 days cash on hand to 90 days in
Let
1
me
year.
address that. First of all, let's talk about conservative assumptions. There are 3 or 4 of them that override the others, and then there's a whole bunch that don't have as much impact. The places that I think where we were conservative is your current budget is projected to be a couple $1 million underrun.
Could you stay by the mic, please? Thank you.
And at least initially, what I've seen, you're probably doing better than that. So we'll leave that one alone. That remains to be seen. The issue of the retirements, the 26, I think, that are going to retire in the next 3 years, average their terminal salary maybe 140 or so. Your average salaries are about 65 million. So if you just replace those 26 people with a $70,000, $80,000 a year difference, average salaries, and I think that's probably conservative because some of the new folks are going to be newer than that. I said maybe that's another $1 million, but that could well be pushing $1.5 million or $2 million. So that's part of the reason why the surplus is expanding over the next 3 years. The tax base, the EAV, we are showing a new EAV of about $50 million a year. That, I believe, is conservative for several reasons. In the heydays, you were getting 100, 200 million. Well, that probably isn't going to happen. But in the last 8 years, since the crash, you have still averaged in the $40 to $50 million new EAV range every year. The last 3 or 4 years, it has gone from, if I remember the numbers rightly, 40, 42, 48, 51. I just talked to the county assessor, and through 10 months of the year, and Rhonda Novak has typically been very good about that, she's suggesting she thinks it's going to be more like 64 million this year. So it does appear that things are recovering in terms of your tax base. And I said, well, let's say that's another $1 million, but it could well be more than that. We've been conservative and said just 50, which is basically what has been for the last 8-year average. I think that is conservative. The issue on the CPI isn't as critical as the other assumptions if you assume that you can keep your salary increases in line with the CPI. I mean, if CPI goes at 4% and you give 4%, it's a wash. If it stays at 1 and you're able to restrain it at 1, it's still a wash. So the CPI is not a critical factor in the building surplus. Now, to get to your question, you go back to, I think, tab 5. Here's why things take off. The surplus that I just talked about that's been building, we think, and improving every year, and you're getting a bigger surplus. For the next 4 or 5 years, you've been taking that surplus and paying down and eliminating the tax anticipation warrants. That is no longer required. Now your surplus gets added to the ad fund and the total. That's the big reason things take off beginning right here, and it looks like a hockey stick, but there's a good reason for that, because this emerging surplus of whatever it is at that point in time, $3, $4, $5, $6 million bucks, if you believe the conservative estimates, all of a sudden is no longer required to pay down the debt, but it can be added to your operating fund balances. Again, a point I made earlier. Do I believe that number right there is going to be, what is it, 50 million? No. I do believe the trends. I really believe the trends you're seeing here. Personal opinion, they may even be conservative, but I do believe those trends. To get back to your original question, I'd be happy to sit down with you and go over any of these to provide some confidence, but just, giving you the 80 spreadsheets, I don't think would be worth your time.
I didn't know if you had just came out with the dollars.
Yeah.
Like
Capital
3 years.
capital projects, how much do we put in?
I'm not looking for 80 spread, I'm just looking for
Major variables.
2016, here's the variables, here's how the dollars came out, and just, year by year.
I do have a one-page spreadsheet that I don't really have with me, I don't think, but we can provide, that has all of the assumptions that we've made here. You don't have it, I can email you an updated one with all of the assumptions, if that would help.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Larry, in the back, I know you put in here a page about the state aid history. Do you have that up? Can you just kind of discuss that?
I don't have it right there, but we can discuss it.
I just thought it was interesting. I know there's been some groups that have been very critical
Page
about
33 in the book.
Yeah, page 33, which was there were some groups that were very, very critical about our statements that, part of this is related to state aid, and I thought it was very interesting that it stated that $8 million a year in reasonably expected state funding over the last decade has been lost.
Yeah, and for those in the audience who can't see this, if you go back, 10 years ago, the state was providing roughly 20% of your overall revenue. In the last 10 years, first of all, the state will say, gee, there's a foundation level of $6,100 per student, and make you think that, hey, you get $6,100 per student. Well, they have the most complicated formula you have ever seen in your life, with about a dozen different factors that determines how rich they think you are and what you can afford. A couple things. They haven't updated that for inflation, that $6,100 at all, and you're now in an environment where what's it cost a typical high school, $14,000, $15,000 a year to educate a student. In general state aid, you are now getting something like $700 per student, with a few more hundred thrown in for some miscellaneous stuff and transportation. So over that 10 years, the original 20% of your revenue has now shrunk to about 11 or 10%. So the arithmetic is simple. 8 to 10% of your revenue on an $80 to $100 million budget is, you pick it, $7, $8 million bucks that 10 years ago you expected, if they just held things steady, you would be getting, and you are not getting now. My view, that's been a significant contributor.
But that's just a percentage of revenue. Revenue hasn't declined. You're just basing it off of the revenue that it represented back at a point in time versus what it is of the budget now, correct?
I think it has, in fact, I don't have the base numbers with me. I think it has, in fact, declined some. And the reason the percentages make some sense is that over those 10 years, inflation has gone up and up and up, and it has, it has cost much more to educate one of your students than it did 10 years ago. So even if it were just flat, they have not kept up with their supposed mandate by the Constitution to supply funding. There are other reasons, but there's no doubt in my mind this was a contributor.
Any other questions?
Skip one quick. There you talked about salary, CPI. What other factor other than salaries derails this?
That's salaries and benefits is 80% of your budget. So that is overwhelmingly the critical factor. You got to spend some money on maintenance and so forth, but we put $1 million a year in for roofs and parking lots and maintenance. There are a lot of other things that contribute in smaller ways. But salary and benefits at 80% of your expenses is the overwhelming factor that you need to control one way or another. I'm not telling you what your contract should be. The example I gave was just to illustrate the point.
So if I could recap your professional opinion, this game is won or lost with salary and benefits. You could give me the other factor that derails it.
I don't think there's any other factors that can seriously derail it. Other things can certainly complicate it. But that, again, is the overwhelmingly most important factor. If the new EAV doesn't materialize at all, that'll contribute.
0809 happens again, all that stuff.
Yeah, and again, to the other point, I have a spreadsheet on what those assumptions will. I think it's not going to be fun for the next few years, but I think you have a positive future down the road if you can hear that.
Thank you, Mr. Heidemann. Ron, did you have a question? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
Will this presentation be put online?
Yes, we will put this up with the board package.
Okay, thank you.
Roof and asphalt survey.
Good evening. I believe everybody received a copy of the roof replacement plan and asphalt replacement plan by DLA Architects.
Sorry, what was that?
DLA Architects? Is this not? Can you hear? Yeah. Okay. Basically, what these two documents are going to do for us is help put together the plan that we'll be talking about over the next few months in regards to operations and maintenance and a budget for that. The roof plan, if I talk really briefly just about the first 3 years at Central and East, DLA recommended a a little under $3 million in roofing for the next 3 years. So, knowing that we need new tennis courts from the asphalt plant, knowing that there's some maintenance needed on the parking lots, and knowing that we're going to have a 10-year life safety survey in December, gives us an opportunity to take all of these items to a committee and develop a plan to move forward.
Can you tell us where all this work needs to be done?
I'm sorry, this is directed to the Board of Education.
And the public?
Anybody have any questions?
This is something that, I know we talked about it at the last finance committee meeting, building and finance committee meeting. Is this something that, as far as that plan, that you're kind of looking at building and finance committee to put together with you? Is that kind of the thought?
Yes.
We will bring some of that forward. And these will also be available online. We put the link to these, and the purpose, one thing that already came out of this is for the opportunity to go back to some of our warranty work. Rich already met with our building supervisors, getting some of that completed right away. The next step then would be able to we would look to go to bid in February to determine the exact price